Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you at the first conference of 2017. We have the honor to have a young speaker, but with an interesting subject. I'm going to tell you a few words about her. Laetitia Phialon, finishing her studies at the University of Geneva, she starts to flirt with mortuary customs and central Greece. Beginning the research on Tanagra Larnakes, she continued at her master and PhD studies on the emergence of the Mycenaean civilization in Boeotia and central Greece, respectively, at the University of Sorbonne. Some years later, she conducted a postdoctoral research on the household equipment of the Bronze Age settlement at Crisa, with a fellowship from the Swiss National Science Foundation, being at the same time a member of the French Archaeological School at Athens. During the last 6 years, she gained teaching experience as visiting assistant professor at the universities of Zurich and Bern, focusing on Bronze Age and Mycenaean archaeology. She has participated in a number of excavations, not only in Switzerland, but also in Greece, in Eretria, Mitru, Kopais, and in Cadmea at Thebes. She also studied pottery from Agia Irini, Thebes, and Kira. At the same time, she is preoccupied with workshop organization and writing. She has published articles in Bulletin de Correspondance Hellenique et Revue Archéologique, as well as in peer-reviewed publications concerning social differentiation through artisan activities and funerary practices in Middle Helladic and Mycenaean period. Today, she is going to present us an update on funerary landscapes in Middle Helladic and early Mycenaean central Greece. So, let us enjoy her lecture. Welcome.
I would first like to thank the organizer for the invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to present and discuss here results of my research and ongoing work. This lecture aims to explore funerary landscape in central Greece, their variability and changes during the 1st century of the 2nd millennium BC. And when I say central Greece, I include Attica and Euboea, not only Boeotia, Phocis, and Phthiotis. This slide shows 64 sites in this region where graves ranging in date from the Middle Helladic period to Late Helladic 3A1 phases have been discovered. These are cemeteries, grave plots, or single isolated graves. I include them in my study on the emergence of the Mycenaean civilization in central Greece. A large part of my research focused on the relationship between the habitation area and burial plots, as well as on the distribution of graves according to the type. These are two main topics that I will discuss today in the light of updated examples. This lecture is also a great opportunity to consider a period of deep cultural and social change on the Greek mainland. That is the shaft grave period, late Middle Helladic to late Helladic 2A. That is a period of 200–250 years. And so the shaft grave concentrate in Mycenae. There are also two shaft graves in Lerna. On the other hand, the use of the Tholos tomb are much more widespread in the Peloponnese, and particularly in Messenia in late Helladic 1 and 2, as it has been demonstrated by, for instance, John Bennett and Yannis Kalanakis. Rich and wealthy burial have drawn attention to the Peloponnese, and now we can add the warrior graves in Pylos. But funerary landscape in central Greece also deserve a special attention. Providing exhaustive inventories of graves according to their type requires an in-depth bibliographic examination. My own research was based on previous gazettes and catalogue. Here you have a selection. Since 2011, many new archaeological reports have been published, I think to the Deltion and to the Archaeology in Greece online. Material from old excavation have been restudied and published, like the one in Eleusis, for instance. And of course, many papers have been published in conference proceedings. I will refer to article published in Studying Date today. In my update, I integrate this recent data and interpretation in order to discuss and sometimes to revise datings of graves and also to reconsider burial practices. Regarding the type of graves, in Central Greece, like in other regions on the mainland, schist graves and pit graves were the most common type in Middle Helladic and also during the shaped grave period. Pit burials were found in Middle Helladic context, and pit graves occurred in late Middle Helladic and early late Helladic context. You can see here examples from Boeotia and Phokis. It is a well-established fact that the number of schist graves strongly decreased after the shaft grave period. And in my study, I focused on their distribution in Central Greece. That gave a clear picture of this decrease and its extent. Similarly, there is nothing new in the fact that chamber tomb became the most popular type during the late Helladic period. However, the distribution over two successive periods and the comparison with the schist grave, as you can see here, show major transformation in the funerary landscape, and particularly in ancient East Locris, and from Thebes to Chalkis, and within Attica during the studied period. I only add here a site for the chamber tomb in Lamia, near Lamia. Regarding the location of the grave within a site, it has been emphasized that schist and pit graves, as well as pit burial, were mostly uncovered in settlement area. This is the case for the example that I showed earlier, here two of them. In Orchomenos, many graves were found within architectural remains on the Acropolis and other on the boundaries of the Middle Helladic settlement at the foot of the hill. It was very challenging work to re-examine this settlement and the grave, and although to be confronted to the study of Calliope Sari while finishing my manuscript. In her recent article in Studied Date, Calliope reminds us that 50 graves, schist, simple pits, and pit burials was revealed among architectural remains of the Middle Bronze Age by the Bavarian excavation at the beginning of the 20th century. The trench P, for instance, is a relevant example. The burials were concentrated in a plot, but discovered at different levels, as shown on this stratigraphic section reconstructed by Calliope Sari. Except graves 66 and 55, which were clearly uncovered at a deeper level, most graves in these trenches have been installed once the houses abandoned. This phenomenon occurred in other settlements in Central Greece, and it's been emphasized by many researchers, including Calliope Sari. In some cases, the burial plots were not reoccupied. But in other cases, the burial plots were recovered by a later Mycenaean building level. Thebes, of course, is another site in Central Greece which is of great interest for our understanding of the funerary landscape, since many Middle Helladic graves were uncovered in the settlement context, that is to say in building, under the floor, or on them, or close to them. Grave plots and single isolated graves were found on all over the Crimea. There were also cemeteries of chamber tomb on the surrounding hill, as shown on this slide. I show you here a map published by Vasilis Stavontinos and Yanis Fapas. In a recent article of Eleni Andrikou in Katon Chronia Archeologico Ergustitiva, Middle Helladic grave plot on the Crimea were mapped. There are 31 plots for a total of at least 150 Middle Helladic graves. It had been reported in another article by Avantinos and Kyriakipsiraki in Mesoelladica. The graves dated to Middle Helladic, Late Helladic I transition are included in this total of 150 graves. The most important cemetery is located on the east side of the Crimea. There are 67 graves, uncovered mostly in the Pavlo Yiannopoulou plot, which has been excavated several times in the 60s. It also include the graves in Tomite plot, with the 11 graves in total. So Middle Helladic constructions were uncovered in most of the plots shown here on the Cadmea. But some of them, in some of them, the main building level was an early Helladic one or a late Helladic tree one. In the Pavlo-Yiannopoulou plot, an important Mycenaean palatial building level overlaid the Middle Helladic grave plot. This is the Oplothek ground or arsenal. In three photo properties, which were excavated at different years between 2001 and 2007, graves dated to Middle Helladic and early Late Helladic have been uncovered. And this is the same situation. We have 3 middle graves and a Middle Helladic building in the Pelekanu plot, 14 graves, Middle Helladic, Late Helladic 1, 2 in the Marinu plot, 6 burial of the same period in the Café plot. They laid in the Middle Helladic building, some of them probably on their floor. This plot, the Café 1 and the Marinu plot, in this plot, there were a late Helladic 3B building that was excavated in a higher level. One can hesitate to consider a burial plot like the Pavlo-Yiannopoulou one with other plot where graves were associated with building, as I did in this table. But some late Helladic walls, probably earlier than late Helladic 3B, were uncovered in this plot. Moreover, its location near to the center does not really correspond to the boundaries of a settlement. Some other burial plots were located more clearly on the boundaries of the Bronze Age settlement, in areas that were probably not inhabited during the Middle Helladic and early Late Helladic period, despite the fact that earlier or later constructions were excavated here. In the area of the Archaeological Museum to the north, a large early Helladic building was uncovered. It can be argued that a first step toward a separation of the burial from the inhabited area took place in the Middle Helladic, Late Helladic 1 transitional phase. Nevertheless, it is only on the following phase, in Late Helladic 2A, that dead were buried more regularly far from the settlement when the first chamber tombs were in use. And tips may be cited again here. The new chamber tomb cemetery appeared and expanded on the hill around the Cadmea from Late Helladic 2A onward. And when I say far from settlement, I mean more or less far. Some cemeteries of chamber tombs in central Greece were not associated with a contemporary settlement in their earliest phases, like the tombs in Kalitea Pyrgari or Tanagra Dendron. Regarding tomb 2 at Aya Anna, it may be questioned again whether this chamber tomb was already in use in late Helladic 1. I first hesitated to assign these two mite-painted jars to a precise phase within the Shaftquake period, and I did not exclude a late Helladic 2A date. But I would not suggest to date them to late Helladic 1. Consequently, various grave types may have been in use in a very close period in Thebes, and Mycenaean cultural markers, like chamber tombs, may have appeared very early in the late Helladic period. I will consider this issue again in the last part of my lecture. So, these are various grave types represented in Thebes, but no Tholos tomb. In contrast to Orchomenos, but here the Tholos tomb is dated from the Palatial period. Tholoi tombs, as you know, are monumental built tombs that provide regularly, when not looted, rich grave goods, and therefore they were considered traditionally as royal tombs. They were actually used by and for the elite, the Mycenaean elite. In Thebes, a chamber tomb, large and well executed, also provide rich grave goods, and it was certainly the elite that was buried in this tomb. In central Greece, Tholos tombs are rare, not incomparable with the Peloponnese. In the early Mycenaean period, they are located in Attica and Euboea. And the Tholoi in Attica are much more larger than the one in Evia. The tallest tree in Torikos has the chamber has a diameter of more than 9 meters, and the one in Oxylitos in Euboea less than 5 meters. And the dromos of the tomb in Marathon is 25 meters long. I show here the tomb tree in Torikos, but it's a particular one because of the chamber with this oblong form. These tall tombs are not associated with a major contemporary Mycenaean settlement, and there are no nearby chamber tombs, as it appears clearly on the bottom map on this slide. By using Tolos tomb, the local elite in Torikos and Marathon may have intended to express a stronger link with the elite in the Peloponnese and the burial custom. I remind that the Toloi are much more widespread in the Peloponnese than in central Greece. A further interesting point is the distribution of built chamber tombs in central Greece. I will call them BCTs. In comparison with that of the Tolos and the chamber tomb during the late Helladic 2B and 3A phase. I add here Mitru to my mind in red, for light red. In these phases, BCTs and chamber tombs were not in use in the same site. On the other hand, BCTs and Tolos tomb can be located at the same site, like in Torikos, or in the same area, like in Marathon. BCTs occurred in the Middle Helladic period in Attica, in Marathon, and Eleusis. In Marathon, here on the top of the slide, BCTs were built within stone tumuli. BCTs have various forms as demonstrated and studied by Nikos Papadimitriou, and many of them constitute a type that developed from this grave. You have here a BCT of the West Cemetery in Eleusis. Accordingly, I would suggest that communities that prefer to use BCTs than chamber tomb in the late Helladic period were more rooted in Middle Helladic burial custom. However, BCTs were mostly used for successive burial. There was also a deep change for this community in the mortuary practice. Regarding Eleusis, several graves were discovered in various sectors on the Acropolis, including the area of the later Telesterion. They are not all concentrated in the West Cemetery. These last 3 years, Michalis Kosmopoulos published 2 main books on Eleusis, and the first one, entitled The Sanctuary of Demeter at Eleusis, the Bronze Age, is an in-depth study that includes the re-examination of the Bronze Age context, stratigraphic sequence, and structure excavated by Skias, Kourouniotis, Travlos, and Milonas, as well as a publication of the Bronze Age poetry from this excavation. Of course, Eleusis was a key site in my previous study. Many graves were uncovered in settlement context and on the slope on the Acropolis, within the houses or close to them. I will only concentrate on the sector 3 on the south slope. There are 4 sectors on this slope, and focus on the 19 graves excavated here in order to show how data can be updated. In sector 3, the houses were mainly occupied in Middle Helladic and Late Helladic II. The graves are well located and dated from the Middle Helladic period to Late Helladic II, and in one case, possibly Late Helladic IIb, 3a1. Most graves are schist and pit graves, and they have no great wood. Their dating is based mainly on their context. Their position is in relation to the house varied. For instance, the pit grave number 15 laid in a higher level than house age, and therefore post-dated. The house age is attributed to a late Helladic 1-2 layer. And a schist grave number 16 was, on the other hand, uncovered under the floor of this house. And this grave is dated to late Helladic 1 and possibly late Helladic 2a. There are also 2 other burials that can be assigned to late Helladic 2. There is only one Pitos burial in sector 3 and dated to the transition Middle Helladic, Late Helladic, and one schist grave also from the transition period. 2 further burials are possibly a bit earlier, Middle Helladic tree phase, or earlier because they were discovered under a floor associated to the house D, and so on. Adjusting the result as seen on this slide, we note a strong concentration of graves in Middle Helladic 3 to Late Helladic 2A. That is to say, during the shaft grave period in sector 3, and stronger than I supposed in my previous study. The same exercise can be done for the other sector in the Acropolis. I won't do this today, but I would stress that 35 graves were uncovered on the south slope, but many of them cannot be assigned to a specific chronological phases, especially in sector 1, because there are very old excavations at the end of the 19th century. Grave goods were rare, also in the other sector. Here you have an example, late Helladic 2B vase from grave 8 in sector 1. And on the east slope, that is on the Telesterian area, there is a total of 27 graves. And on this slope were discovered the most interesting grave. On the top right here, you have a grave that contains graves good, bronze dagger, 51 small worked fragments of boar tusk, and this is why it was called the warrior grave. I will consider this grave again at the last part of my lecture. Under it, there is a built tomb. The interior was divided into two compartments, and the two skulls were found there, and numerous other human bones. I supposed previously that the grave was used for successive burial, but this interpretation may be discussed in the light of new bioanthropological studies done inside, like Kira. Finally, still on the east slope, some burial may be assigned to Late Helladic 2B and 3A1. So it is a relatively recent phase during the pre-palatial period to find burial in settlement context, and this is more recent than I suppose in 2011. Moreover, redating graves that were uncovered in settlement context on the basis of their grave good, that is pottery generally, may lead to questions of stratigraphic sequences again, and sequences reported by excavator. It concerns the settlement of Crisa in Phokis that I re-examined these 3 last year. I would like to thank the 10th F48, the French School, and the Swiss National Science Foundation for authorization and funding respectively. This Bronze Age settlement is located to the south of the village of Criso, and here you have a view taken from above the modern village of Delphi. The site of Crisa is located on a rocky spur that go down into the plain. You can see also the ITA on the coast, the stone. The Bronze Age settlement was excavated on the southwestern part of the rocky spur, close to the small church or chapel Aios Iorios, and some architectural remains excavated in the 30s are today visible, but on the ground surface, but most of them are covered by earth and vegetation now. Nevertheless, the site is well known for this fortification wall dated to Late Helladic 3B, and you can see here a section of it. And also a new result of a topographical survey. The line here in red is the today's path that crosses the rocky spur. You can compare it also with the map published in 1937. In a second article published in 1938, small object and inventory pottery from the French excavation were described. Some shards from Crisa were also later published with the pottery of Kira, and also by Penelope Menjoy in 1999. Lacrope, Simpson, and Dickinson in the Gazetteer, Munjoy redate the 4 level of the Bronze Age settlement. Here, a comparison with the sequence proposed by the French excavators. First, I suppose that the earliest level may have been occupied from the Middle Helladic 2 phase onward. This is an interpretation that concerns the main sector and because of the pottery. The pottery found at the level of the construction B mainly included Greminian and matte-painted pottery, while the house C, more recent, rather gave yellow minion. However, a re-examination of the inventoried pottery, and especially pottery coming from the grave, led me to question again this date. 15 graves were uncovered in the main sector. 4 of them contained pottery, and they were assigned to a specific level, the first or the second one. Regarding grave 10 and 11, it had been reported by the French excavator that were buried in the ground and a deeper level than the construction, and they were covered by the floor of the room. This is why they belong to the first Middle Helladic occupation level. Each one contained a vase. These are 2 matte-painted amphoras, very similar. The close parallels are an amphora with a conical foot from Kira, uncovered in a Middle Helladic 3B graves, according to Dor and collaborators, and amphorisk from site in Argolis, ranging in date from Middle Helladic 3B to Late Helladic 1B, according to 7 dicts. Therefore, if we assign these 2 graves to the transitional phase or to Late Helladic 1, the date of building B should be revised. The building would have been occupied in Late Helladic 1 and not in Middle Helladic 2, as suggested by the excavator. If building B was reoccupied in Late Helladic 1, it would be surprising to find in a Late Helladic 1 layer, a higher proportion of grey minion than yellow minion. And when I say yellow minion, it can include all fine burnished lightware. Unfortunately, no inventoried pottery can be associated with this building. There is also no inventoried pot related to building C, which is more recent than building B. This is the only one that is clearly assigned to the second level by the excavator. So could the floor have been refitted, the floor that covered the graves 10 and 11? However, the tombs were found in a deeper level, they say. Building B is not the only structure assigned by the excavator to the first level. And you can see here there are the building A and possibly building D. Several inventoried pots were associated with these 2 buildings. They are of Middle Helladic tradition, burnished and matte painted. However, the matte painted cup here with the ring handle should be dated to Late Helladic 1, since this shape appears in deposits in this phase, especially in Zungiza. I thank Jerry Rutter for bringing to my attention this deposit. The ladle as well, also find parallel in Late Helladic 1 pottery from Zungiza. There are 3 Greminian vases, and in my opinion, they are earlier than this phase. It is a question, I wonder whether they should be dated to Middle Helladic 2 or Middle Helladic 3, and especially the goblet here. It found a parallel in phase 7 in Mitru. I thank also Chris Hell for the discussion. Another question is to consider these vases as a wall, as the same deposit, or separately for dating the building. These are issues that I'm considering for our next publication, but they are not central for this lecture on funerary landscapes. Nevertheless, further graves were uncovered in the settlement of Crisa, but in another trench, in sector 1. One of them, the grave 227, contained a Late Helladic 2B piriform jar. This is the most recent grave uncovered in this settlement. An intriguing point is that there is no Mycenaean Late Helladic 2A pottery coming from the settlement of Crisa. Building E was occupied in its first phase during the transitional phase or in Late Helladic 1. Its second phase is clearly of the Late Helladic 3 period. How can we interpret the lack of Mycenaean Late Helladic 2A pottery? Was the settlement abandoned after the destruction, during a quite short period, 50 years, about. In this case, grave 27 is the main evidence for a reoccupation in Helladic 2b. On the other hand, if the settlement was still occupied in Helladic 2a, it would have been quite modest. This picture changed radically in Helladic 3a1 when the settlement was well occupied. But no grave of this phase was uncovered in this settlement. On the east side of the village, the actual village of Criso, north to the rocky spur, 3 chamber tombs, which were excavated in 1969, were associated with this settlement. These chamber tombs were in use in late Helladic 3A2, 3B, and 3C, as suggested by the pottery. But it was not the only grave good here. There were beds, small bronze jewelry, and stone steel. And the seal were published in the CMS. But tombs and grave goods have been studied by Eleni Konturi and presented in her lecture at the Cycladic Museum the last year. In this region, there is another very important grave. This is the Tolos tomb, discovered near Amphissa, the olive trees, in 2014 by the Archaeological Service. And it was also in use from the 13th century to the 11th century. The first result of a collective work was also presented by Mrs. Konturi in her lecture in the Mycenaean seminar. And this discovery is all the more important because there is no other tombs in the region that is the ancient West Locris up to now. The nearest Tolos tomb are located in Medeon. And this tomb was not plundered. This tomb and the Toloi in Medeon are dated to late Helladic III. And up to now, there is no evidence of Tolos tomb used in late Helladic 1 and 2 in Phokis. Evidence of chamber tombs in these phases are also scarce in Phokis. One of the tombs excavated in Delphi, probably a chamber tomb, contained a late Helladic 2b goblet and was therefore possibly used in this phase. The discovery of other chamber tombs in Delphi to the west of the Apollo sector are also reported. You can see here the site of Delphi in green. It's the left one. Moreover, chamber tombs were discovered on the East Cemetery near Delphi. That is the number 46 on the Spinner-Scorder's map. Their use, the first use, may date back to late Helladic 3A1 because an alabastron of this phase comes from this cemetery. And so you can see 2 maps here on this side, one of Despina Skoda and the other of Sylvie Müller. They are both published in 1992. On Müller's map, Medeon of Phokis appears, and so I have indicated with a red cross. The cemetery was in use from late Helladic 2 to late Helladic 3C, and it includes an important late Helladic 2 built tomb. And of course, in this region, there is another very important site. It is Kira. It appears in blue here. I want to consider it especially. There are not direct eye contact between both settlements, Crisa and Kira, but between Crisa and Itea. And it appears here, Itea in yellow. Chamber tombs were also discovered in Itea. So the first excavation in Kira was undertaken by a member of the French school in the 30s. They opened up trenches to the north of the church. That is Sector D, for instance. It is now covered by olive groves. The results were published in 1960. It includes several plans and stratigraphical sections observed in trench and pits. The building levels are directly dated and not numbered in a simple sequence. In this stratigraphic section, in the late Helladic 3 building level is represented in sector A and B, but not in sector D, the main one. It appeared to be the same for the late Helladic 1 and 2 level. However, building of the middle Helladic 3B level was still occupied in the early late Helladic period. The middle Helladic settlement in Kira was much more extended than the remains brought to light by the French excavation. The Greek Archaeological Service has excavated numerous plots in the village since the 60s, 70s. In almost every plot, Middle Helladic remains were uncovered, in 80 plots about. This last year, new systematic excavation began in 2009 under the auspices of the Efforate of Focus and the French School. A topographical survey was undertaken in 2008. Here is a map of the French School, and in transparency, the plan published in 1960. According to my study, at least 118 graves, Middle Helladic and early Late Helladic in date, were uncovered at Kira. It includes 58 graves excavated in the 30s. And you can see some of them in Sector D. They are scattered in the inhabited area. At least 60 graves were reported by the Archaeological Service in 14 plots. And you can see here the Corelli plot where the pottery kilns were excavated. The graves are mostly seized, pit, but they include also Peter's burial. 3 photo plots may be mentioned here. In the Mole plot, the graves were found within Middle Helladic architectural remains. But in the Papadrosu plot, there were no architectural remains dated to the Bronze Age, and it was probably not inhabited in its eastern part. One of the 9 graves contained a Late Helladic 3A fragmentary crater. It is also a very recent phase in the pre-palatial period to find a grave discovered in a settlement. But in this part, it was probably not inhabited. The Papadrosu plot located to the south of the French excavation. And it would be very helpful to have access to mapped plot in order to understand the development of burial plot in respect to the settlement pattern from the Middle Helladic to Late Helladic III period. The site of Kira is all more important because about 20, I think, graves has been revealed by new French-Greek excavation, and burial has been studied by bioanthropologists Anna Lagia and Johanna Muftafi, notably. Graves were uncovered in both new explored area in the northeast sector and the west sector, but mostly in the western one. And you have here a picture with Anya Layad giving a field lecture. So I participate in this excavation. Regarding the mortuary practice, I will refer to the article in Studying Date. The author stressed that infants and children were buried in Middle Helladic house during the active period of use or immediately thereafter. It concerned burial located in the northeastern sector and 2 infant graves uncovered in a Middle Helladic building level in the western sector. The larger group, however, belongs to the uppermost stratum in an area that was probably not more active, that is no more inhabited. Therefore, it has been stressed that the graves' inhabitation patterns have changed deeply in the western sector as the transitional phase. Only 4 of these graves contain grave good, that is the Late Helladic 1, 2, but 3. So, how wide was the transformation of inhabited area in burial plots? It has been argued that it was a broad phenomenon on the Greek mainland during the Middle Helladic 3, Late Helladic 2A phases, that is to say, during the Shaftgrave period. It raised then the question of where people settled during the Late Helladic 2 period. A few Middle Helladic settlements were definitely abandoned. In Phiotis, for instance, I think, Kalopodi, Castro, Achinos, and Lianokadi. In central Greece, there are only a few substantial buildings clearly occupied during the Late Helladic II period. For instance, in Etrosis, in Boeotia, Mitru in Phiotis, Edips of Scumbi in Euboea, Eleusis and Aios Kosmas in Attica. This settlement, except that of Aios Kosmas, were well inhabited in the Middle Helladic period. When Late Helladic II architectural remains are identified in other settlements, these are mostly walls that do not form coherent spaces or rooms. Therefore, there is no evidence that people moved massively from a settlement to another at the end of Late Helladic I or in Late Helladic II, or that communities regularly occupied other areas within the same settlement in Late Helladic II. Is there evidence of a population decrease in Late Helladic II? Possibly. Another explanation may be suggested, but it is a theoretical one. Most Late Helladic II buildings have been destroyed by subsequent construction, so completely that no architectural remains of this period were found in a destruction layer. It may also be suggested that the Late Helladic IIb building have been reorganized and comprised into the subsequent settlement so perfectly that it was impossible to identify a Late Helladic II architectural phase within the later buildings. And when I say later building, I mean building of the palatial period. In Thebes, for instance, it is clear that the plot that revealed Middle Helladic construction were also densely built during the Late Helladic IIIa-II, IIIb phases. There are only a few Late Helladic IIIa-I substantial buildings in Central Greece. Among them, dwelling in Chrysa and in Eleusis. There is also a building in Glypha near the Gulf of Chalkis. And again, the settlement of Aidipsos Skumbi in Euboea that can be cited here. However, if Late Helladic II and Late Helladic IIIa-I building were simply not preserved, what happened with their equipment? One could accept that Late Helladic II and IIIa-I material culture in habitation area did not disappear completely, but might have been found in a fragmentary state in Late Helladic IIIa-II, IIIb layer, or in pits, for instance. It may be reminded that pits on the south slope of the Acropolis of Athens yield a lot of Late Helladic II and IIIa-I pottery, and therefore it can be supposed that the south slope or the top of the Acropolis was well inhabited during these phases. One complete and in-depth study of settlement context and material can shed light on this kind of issues. The relationship between the habitation and mortuary landscape in central Greece is paradoxical during the Late Helladic II and IIIa-I period. There are only a few new dwelling areas when new cemeteries appeared and expanded in these phases. In other words, the emergence of propagation of chamber tombs may be interpreted as a relatively independent phenomenon that was not related to growing or moving settlement patterns in central Greece. Regarding mortuary practice in Kyra again, and about the second group I read, these include primary, single infant and child burial in cyst and pit grave, secondary single burial in earth pit, secondary multiple burial in earth pit, and successive primary with secondary burial and secondary burial in stone cyst graves. Exploring how dead were buried is certainly more interesting than just numbering their graves. I will let you read this article, but I would like to point out the mortuary variability in this site. In addition, pits were also used for adult primary interment, and secondary burials were not restricted to remains of adults. So, Kyra is a site where many cyst and pit graves have been used for more than a single burial. In the French publication, and I think the old one, on 1960, publication, the position of the skeletons within the grave and that of disarticulated bone found in heaps are briefly described. I first interpreted the bone remains found in heaps as evidence of successive burial, but the multiple use of cyst and pit graves for secondary burial is now attested by bioanthropological observation. This practice implies a strong and meaningful manipulation of the skeleton. The bones were not only pushed aside to let place to a new interment, but relocated in another grave. Moreover, the case that I consider as potential double burials, that is, two dead buried in the same time, were probably not primary burial. And one may have been secondary, the other primary, or both may have been secondary. Of course, I would also revise my comment on potential triple burial for the same reason. Grave 59, that contained two skeletons, and also interested in grave goods, so is a part of this grave. It must be noted that grave dated by the French excavator to the Middle Helladic 3B phase may have been contemporary with the Late Helladic 1 phase in chronological terms. The graves discovered in the 30s were also rarely furnished with grave goods. But here you have a good case. However, the Middle Helladic 3B pottery found nearby, such this crater, has been redated, for instance by Peter Pavuk, to Late Helladic 1. Other vases uncovered close to the grave, 42, were either attributed to Late Helladic 1 or Late Helladic 2B. Grave 42 itself dated to Late Helladic 1, according to the French excavator. I would like to add two comments. First, on the pottery in Central Greece. With ongoing ceramic study based on stratigraphic sequence, it will be probably easier to attribute some diagnostic feature of matte painting and burnished wares to Late Helladic 1 phase, and possibly to identify other diagnostic features for the Late Helladic 2A phase. Secondly, on grave 42, this grave is one of the richest in Kira. It contains a skeleton and a rolled up gold wire found under its chest, a bronze pin head with double protome, and remains of other bronze pins at its chest height. Another grave, a pit one, was recently excavated, and it also held jewelry. And it is reported now in the archaeology in Greece online. It was discovered with another cis grave. Regarding graves that have furnished weapons, it must be noted that grave 59 was not an isolated case in Kira. Three other cis graves are concerned. Grave 5 in sector E with a sword found in fragments but complete, and also with a dagger and a knife. They constitute a wall equipment. Interesting is that the grave with weapon here in Kira were found in various sectors, A, E, and D, and they are not all grouped in the same burial plot. In the light of this specific burial in Central Greece, in my 2011 study, I raised the question whether graves of men buried with weapons must be considered as warrior graves, and whether warlike elite and warrior were buried in the same way. These are current discussion on this issue, and for an in-depth study, I will refer to the book of Bernhard Steinmann, published in 2012, Die Waffengräber der Aegean Bronzezeit. And I will refer also to the article, two articles of Aledis van der Motel here for the grave found in Mitru, in American Journal of Archaeology, and also in Staging Death. Mitru is now one of the most important Bronze Age settlements in Central Greece. It was excavated between 2004 and 2008 under the direction of Aledis van der Motel and Eleni Zahu. Preliminary reports were published recently in Deltion, and an important article was published in American Journal of Archaeology by Joseph Maran and Aledis van der Motel. They examined the cultural connection between Mitru and the northern continental region in the early Late Helladic period. They argue for a maritime trade route which extends to the south through the Euboean Gulf in this period. And you can see it on the map. Regarding the mortuary landscape in Mitru, and I sit inside in Late Helladic 1, at least two permanent plots were created north of the building D, and also on the east border of this area. However, the most impressive grave was discovered inside building D. This is a built chamber tomb, plunder, but that furnished some jewelry, weapons, and other grave goods. I will say more about this tomb a bit later. building D has a long occupation from Late Helladic 1 to Late Helladic 3A1. And east of this building, there is also a Late Helladic 2 pit grave. In the northwest part of this site, in building Age, and it dates from Late Helladic 1, there are 3 burials here excavated on the floor of the room and to the south of this room. And in the southern part, a burial was found between the 2 walls of Late Helladic 2 date, and here possibly in blue. I wonder if there was a Late Helladic 2 building phase here, in the northwest part of the site. There are at least Middle Helladic burial, I just located it, but according to the Delton. And to the east of the main sector, 2 other Late Helladic 1 siege graves were discovered above Middle Helladic architectural remains. Nevertheless, there is a plot, obviously without early Late Helladic houses nearby. It's located in the northeast part of the site, and here you have an actual view for the position. There are 6 graves, and the largest grave of this burial plot is interpreted by the excavator as an elite grave. The other elite grave, of course, is the built chamber tomb that I just mentioned in the main excavated sector. It is the tomb 73. It reaches 5 meters in length, and the fragment of a large polychrome vase were found inside the chamber, and also some human bone fragment. It suggests that the first use of this tomb dates back to Late Helladic 1. But the chamber was extended to 7 meters in a second phase, which took place in Late Helladic 2B. Its enclosure became more monumental, and the domus also. Among the grave goods associated with this tomb, there are boar tusk and stone arrowhead. They belong to both phases. And this is why it had been suggested that 2 elite warriors may have been buried in this tomb. The tomb was maybe also used for the burial of a woman. There is no sword or dagger associated with this built chamber tomb. This kind of weapon may have been disappeared because of plundering, but the question remains open. The tomb 73 in Mitru was actually used for successive burial. On the other hand, the warrior grave excavated in Thebes on the Calmeia corresponds to an individual grave. It is dated to the transitional phase, Middle Helladic, Late Helladic 1. And except the warrior grave at Aegean, which is of Middle Bronze Age 2, the other warrior graves are not older than the transitional phase. So, in a funerary landscape that includes grave 5 in Kiraz, the so-called warrior grave in Eleusis, and the tomb 73 of Mitru, the burial of a warrior in Thebes does not appear like an isolated phenomenon in central Greece at the transition Middle Helladic, Late Helladic 1 anymore. However, no swords were found in this grave in Eleusis and Mitru. And in the Eleusinian one, a dagger was uncovered. Regarding Thebes, moreover, I would not exclude the possibility that the warrior grave on the Calmeia and the chamber tomb 2 at Ayana, this is the one who, that held the 2 matte painted jars, have been used in the same chronological phase in Late Helladic 1, that is within a period of about 50, 70 years. From this chamber tomb come 4 arrowheads, but no other weapon are reported. It was in use in Late Helladic 2A and 2B, and provide mostly bed and pottery. One can wonder whether the deceased in chamber tomb 2 were women or men, whether they belong to the same elite sphere. Graves contain weapons are actually of different types, and they correspond to individual or collective burial. They contain various grave goods. This variability may be interpreted as evidence of social complexity. In Dedra, but in Argolis, for instance, this is what I propose some years earlier. There is a high-ranking warrior, you can see the grave here, and a powerful ruler, the so-called king, that were buried nearby in the same cemetery in late Helladic 3A1. That is within a period of 30-50 years. One in an individual chamber, you can see here, rather modest, and the other in a Taurus tomb with other deceased. If our understanding of the early Mycenaean social cultural landscape in central Greece is largely based on that of a funerary landscape, it is also essential to consider settlement pattern and trade routes for exploring how communities may have interacted, how material knowledge and ideology may have circulated. In the Middle Helladic period, a lane open to the mountain may have stimulated cultural interaction between communities in Phokis and Phthiotis. But in the late Helladic period, communities in Phokis may have turned toward the Corinthian Gulf, those in Phthiotis toward the Euboean Gulf, possibly. And I suppose the same for people in Boeotia, the southern part. They were more oriented to the Euboean Gulf from late Helladic II onward. Further studies on assemblage of grave goods and systematic analysis, bioanthropological analysis are crucial for a better understanding of the mortuary practices and the social organization in mainland Greece. I hope that my lecture today on the funerary landscape in central Greece moved the debate forward. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your explicit lecture, giving us an idea about central Greece, where the landscape was rather grey in comparison with southern Greece, and defining the variability of mortuary practices and the emergence of social groups during the transitional period and the Mycenaean period. So, do you have some observations or comments to make? Questions, possibly? We're all clear?
If you intend to upload your paper somewhere where we can use it, because I found that I missed quite a bit of what you're saying. It was very, very interesting. And I was wondering whether you intend to either publish it or
I think it would be a very good idea. I don't know if it would be possible to propose it, I don't know, for a site. I said online.
Online.
That could be, but that would be some, maybe not the whole lecture, but maybe only what is new, very new, and a little bit shorter. I don't know, I have no really idea now, but online I would think that it would be a good idea. Maybe, I know that there are sites like the site of Barbara Horace and Peter Pavuk or like this, I don't know, but I have to prepare. And it was, I mean, this recorded here. I don't know how it works. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you first for this very comprehensive and very thoughtful study. And my question is, first, there are so many intramuros graves in Thebes or in Crisa. The number is so great, I'm wondering, they are settled at the time, maybe, or they are just ceased to exist and they are used as cemetery. My question is they certainly settled all this period? And at least at Crisa, one of the swords is much later than late Helladic 3A1. The one with the horns, it's 3A1. No, yes. It's very typical. I mean, it's not big deal.
It's very interesting. Because
maybe at the time it was classified as late Helladic one, but it's not.
Oh, that's very interesting. No, I think really that the dating of the grave should be revised, but for that we have to have a really in-depth knowledge of the material. And this should be done systematically to see, and anyway, there are still late Helladic 3A1 graves in settlement in Kira, so, and apparently, what I read in the report. And yeah. And in
so many,
yeah, 2B, 3A1 in Eleusis, at least. See, and yeah, I think that it's very interesting to see that they continue in the late Helladic period, a long time, and it's really interesting because in the same time in the late Helladic 3A1, it's really the time where the chamber tomb really become so common, so popular. So how can we interpret it in terms of richness, of terms of chronological phases as well, but in terms of ethnicity, can we say, or how can we, and the social complexity that is. But yes, I'm very fun to talk about redating graves anyway.
Anybody else? No. So let's have a drink and continue the discussion nearby. Okay? Thank you very much.